You ever gotten to the end of a journey and realized this is not where I thought I would end up? It's probably because you didn't have the destination in mind when you started the journey. So how could you actually be surprised at where you ended up when you didn't know where you were going in the first place? That was definitely the case when I took in this dresser set. Turns out, not having a plan was not a good plan. Because I didn't have the end in mind, I wandered around, I got off track, and I ended up somewhere I didn't think I would be. But stick around. You might just be surprised at where I ended up. I know I was. I'm Amy. I build and revive furniture, often adding something new to something old. I'm sharing tips, tricks, and methods on how to give old pieces a new lease on life. Welcome to my shop. Now this set came with a third piece. It's a floating headboard. It mounts to the wall and it had a little bit of cabinet storage. Now I wasn't really sure what to do with that, but I did have a harebrained idea. Could I take that headboard and turn it into 2 nightstands and do that without it looking like I Frankensteined it together? The dresser and chest were constructed on plinth bases, and you can see here they were pretty shot. Also, I just think this style of furniture looks better with the tapered legs like you see on so many mid-century modern pieces. So I decided to remove them and start building new ones while I fretted about what to do about that headboard. So after some sketching and measuring, I visited my pile of hoarded lumber to find what I was looking for, a piece of spalted maple that I brought back from a trip to North Carolina. Now, I realize that spalted maple isn't typically used to create mid-century modern furniture legs and bases. I know, but hear me out. This grain pattern was, well, it was pretty subdued. Pretty, but subdued. I was worried about getting to the end of the project and being underwhelmed if I'm depending on the wood grain to be the star of the show. So, this spalted maple could add some dimension and, some drama to the final look. So I started by ripping it down to 1.5 by 1.5 inch boards on my table saw. Then I made rough cuts on my miter saw. I'll go back later and make the final cross cuts on my table saw. With the dressers upside down, I placed each leg and cross piece on the frame to make sure I liked the pattern of the wood, and I marked where I wanted the angled cuts to be. Then I cut each leg to a final length of 5.5 inches before getting out my tapering jig to make the angled cuts on each leg. And because evidently my table saw blade is dull, I needed to sand off all the burn marks. Okay, this is much better, and please look how pretty this wood grain is. Before I started assembling the base, I wanted to add a chamfer edge profile to each because, I don't know, I'm just fancy like that. More experienced woodworkers would use dowels to attach the legs to the cross pieces, and I don't disagree. Here, I use pocket holes and glue, and here's why. Number 1, I don't have a good doweling jig yet, but it's on my list. Number 2, and more importantly, I'm just not that good with dowel joinery yet, and for this project, I didn't have any margin for error. Remember, I only had that one piece of wood, and if I messed up even one part, I might have had to start all over again. With different lumber. That wasn't as pretty. Pocket holes also can just get a bad rap. They're used for a lot of furniture and cabinetry construction, and in this case, using good hardwood combined with wood glue and strong screws, it makes for a very strong joint. To attach the bases to the dressers, I used glue and countersunk the screws. I also used a few clamps to hold the base in place. After the bases were installed, I just couldn't put it off any longer. I had to decide what to do about this headboard. If I'm being honest, I really wanted to make it into a pair of nightstands. And worst case scenario, I ruin it, go have a good cry, and continue work on the dresser and chest. To make things even more exciting, I had exactly 2 pieces of the maple left to make the matching bases for the nightstands. And more saw blade marks to sand off. Yay. When I'm building a piece from scratch, I just can't go in all willy-nilly, so I sit down at my computer and I use a program called SketchUp to help me both visualize what it'll look like, but most importantly, help me work out the measurements. And after a while, I worked up the nerve to take a circular saw to the headboard and hope for the best. After cutting the headboard into 2 pieces, I needed to make the cut side match the other side, so I used some of the cutoffs to make trim pieces. Remember, these were originally sliding doors, so I'm also going to have to add regular hinges to the doors so they open and shut, and remove this little track that helped hold the sliding doors in place. Now this is the most exciting part. Each piece got a thorough sanding to remove all the old finish, and because the finish was probably about 70 years old, it didn't put up much of a fight. When I sand veneer, I don't use anything lower than 150 or 180 grit, otherwise it's really easy to sand right through the veneer to the substrate. That's a difficult repair I don't want to make. When I got the finish sanded off, I thought the raw color was too yellow, and I knew when I added a top coat it was going to get more yellow and not in a good way. So I decided to take a piece of the scrap wood left from the headboard and test it out with a few options. I pulled out several different options from my stash: a light gel stain, a pickling stain, a few paints that I've combined with water to make a paint wash, even some cheap white chalk paint that I watered down. I really had no idea how the wood was going to react to these options, so I just threw spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick. I ended up liking Fusion Mineral Paint's Cathedral Taupe mixed with white at a ratio of about 5 parts water to 1 part paint. I brushed it on and then wiped it off immediately. And I taped the handles off because I thought I was going to leave them in the natural color, but I didn't end up liking the contrast, so I applied the paint wash to them too. I'll be really honest here, this is where the project went off the rails for me. I knew I didn't like the raw wood color, and even though I tested it first, I didn't love the paint wash either. And I just didn't know what to do. After the weekend, I didn't feel much better about it, but out of desperation, I decided to give everything a light sanding with a really high grit sandpaper, hoping to tone down the paint wash. And you know what? A beautiful finish emerged. It reminded me of a piece of driftwood that had washed up on a beach and had been sitting out in the sun. I never imagined this set taking on a coastal look, but that's exactly what happened. And listen, I'm on the west coast of Florida, and the coastal look is very popular here. After I accepted that this furniture was going to be in a coastal style, I felt like I was back on track. There was only a few more things to do, including installing the door hinges and the new hardware. Sounds pretty simple, right? Yes and no. I could have used those European or hidden hinges, but their obvious not vintage appearance really bugged me, so I opted for something more likely to have been used in the 1950s. These simple brass hinges needed to be inset in order for the door to sit properly on its little frame, so after marking the hinge locations, I chiseled out a basic outline, then used my trim router to remove the material. This can all be done with a good sharp chisel, but in keeping with the theme of this video, my chisels are very dull. The recess handle was fine when they were sliding doors, but now it felt awkward trying to use it to open the doors. So I used a 3/4 inch dowel to help fill the recessed holes and then added simple brass knobs. There were still mounting holes left on the back of the nightstand, so I grabbed a 1/4 inch dowel and I shaped it down a bit using my drill and a piece of sandpaper. I tapped it in, then used this handy flat saw to make it flush. These markings on the back are original from the factory, and whenever I see these, I try to leave them alone. It's just a cool reminder that these pieces were constructed in a factory, but not by automated machines like mass-produced furniture today. One of the dresser's drawer slides was broken and was causing the drawer to be wonky, so I pulled it out so I could use it as a template to make a new one. Can you imagine how many times these drawers have been open and shut over the last 70 years? It's pretty impressive that this is the only one that was broken. I grabbed a piece of dense hardwood from my stash and got to work. This is a piece of Peroba, and I have no idea where I got it, but you definitely need to use a dense hardwood for drawer slides, otherwise it just won't withstand the wear and tear. I used my table saw to make the cuts. Then I used my sander to smooth the rounded nose. And, the bane of my existence, the saw marks. After testing the new piece in the drawer, I used glue and small screws to install it in place. For the top coat, I sprayed 3 coats of General Finishes water-based polyurethane in satin. I love this top coat. It sprays beautifully, it's extremely durable, and it dries pretty fast. All right, here's a reminder of where we started. And here's how it turned out. I got this set of furniture at an estate sale, and it occurred to me that for many decades this furniture sat in a beautiful waterfront home whose bedroom had stunning views of the Intercoastal Waterway. I wonder if this coastal look is exactly what this furniture's next chapter was meant to be. Like I said in the beginning, this is not where I thought I'd end up, but I ended up loving how this finish turned out, and I think this is going to look beautiful in someone's home for many decades to come. Literally can hear neighbors talking outside. Now this set came... Now how in the did I miss that?